What's up, Notre Dame fans? Mike Singer from blueandgold.com with former Notre Dame linebacker and captain Mike Goolsby. Talking Notre Dame recruiting today, and of course, recent commitment for the Fighting Irish happened just this past weekend. Junior Tuihalamaka committed to Notre Dame over the likes of long offer list. Texas was a finalist. Florida was after him for a while. Stanford was a school that he liked as well, but came down to Notre Dame and Texas. So, if we're going to break down a linebacker, why don't we talk to Captain Mike? So, your first impressions of this commitment, Mike? What did you think about this one for Notre Dame?
Ton of potential, prototype. That word gets thrown around too often, but he's a prototype Mike linebacker. As highly ranked as he is, as impressive as his offer list is, Mike, there's still room for improvement. So I look at that as a good thing. That's my first takeaway.
Sure.
Big physical player.
Certainly, he's a Mike linebacker all the way. We didn't really talk about him off record if Notre Dame sees him playing maybe Mike or Will or Rover or Will or whatever it is. Like, he's a Mike linebacker all the way. And I know that's something you can speak to. I mean, does he remind you of yourself at all? I mean, that was you.
Well, the biggest, I was texting you last night, right, when I was kind of watching his film, just some initial thoughts. And I came into Notre Dame as a Mike, and when my little 2 cups of coffee in the NFL, I played Sam, Mike, and Will. So I was always athletic enough to play Sam or Will, but I just sort of landed at Mike at Notre Dame. So, but this kid currently, as whatever he is, 17-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, he's 6'2", 230. So those Polynesian kids like Manti, I saw Manti once live. I went back and watched the game, and they're just so thickly built so that if he's 230 now, I mean, it's almost inevitable he's going to get north of 240 and probably pretty quickly, which again lends itself to him being a Mike. So, what I mentioned earlier, Mike, there's still room for improvement. And so he plays a little bit high, right? And when you say somebody plays high, oftentimes having been coached before, Mike, coaches speak about playing high as it's like a lack of discipline or maybe a lack of technique. You need to learn to play lower. He really needs to learn to play lower, and specifically, Mike, I'm using my air quotes here for our listeners.
Yeah.
To drop his weight. And like the kids that I train, like linebackers specifically, I was like, if you had 500-pound, like your family jewels, if they weighed 500 pounds, your center of gravity would come down. It's just how you would walk around. So he's going to have to work on a little bit of like hip flexibility and dropping his weight when he goes to make tackles, because it's really, really curious. He's such a physical player, but the physicality really jumps off the screen, Mike, when he's taking on blockers or when he's coming on a blitz, just blowing up offensive linemen. It's fun to watch, but then when you see him to go make contact with a ball carrier, it's not quite as physical. And obviously those tailback isn't as big as a lineman. So he's going to need to learn to drop his weight to kind of run through people as a tackler. He's a little bit grabby now, and coming from somebody that's had a couple shoulder surgeries, when he's playing against some of these Power 5 running backs, when you go to grab as often as he does, like right there, he's kind of a grab and hang on and grab and sort of sling guys down. You'll separate your shoulder against a 210-pound running back. You keep this up. So that's something that love the player, but that's something that you just, even from a health standpoint, Mike, he's got to learn to drive through people on tackles as opposed to grabbing and kind of slinging them down. But good change of direction, definitely a downhill player, has good instincts. When here I am, Mike, running on, but like when you think of like traditional football, like a Mike linebacker, like the Jack Lamberts and the Dick Buckuses and the Mike Singletaries and the Ray Lewises of the world, like the Mike Goolsbys, right, dude? there's like a leadership component to being a Mike linebacker. I think there's like a little bit of an intimidation factor that sort of just comes to mind when you think of a classic Mike linebacker, like a sense of urgency to get to the ball. You see all that with Tuihalamaka. You see all those intangibles. Um, you can tell the game matters. Like again, the sense of urgency. I think that's if anybody wants to go back and look at his sophomore film versus his junior
So
film,
we're
he
watching
really
sophomore right now, Mike.
perfect. So like when you watch a sophomore year tape, Mike, he looks like, which is counterintuitive. He looks much thicker as a sophomore, looks heavier, and then he kind of leaned out as a junior, which you would assume that's him starting to take the game and his nutrition and his workouts a little bit more seriously. So uh, again, if he's willing to kind of put the work in to reshape his body as a high schooler, that shows maybe he's trying to address some potential or perceived weak spots in his game. But this is going to be a big, thick middle linebacker. It's fun, Mike, to forecast, right? I mean, you could just imagine, to me, Prince Khalid playing your will, this kid holding down the Mike spot, and we find a rover in there, which we may have on the roster.
Nolan
But
Ziegler, yeah.
who knows, right? But I mean, everybody wants to forecast Prince as a rover, but I'd bet you $100 he ends up being a will. Um, but yeah, this kid also times blitzes really well. And he seems like kind of a scary dude to get in front of, and super physical with blockers. My only knock on him, and if I was working with him in an off season, is just again working on dropping that weight, a little bit of more hip flexibility that allows him to again drop his base and be a little bit more physical on arriving on contact with a ball carrier specifically.
I think we could have a drinking game every time we say the word Mike in this video with his position in both of our names. Someone could get pretty drunk by the end of this thing.
Sure.
All right, so in the Notre Dame defense, you have a Mike linebacker, Will linebacker, then the Rover. I think everyone knows what the Rover is. That's the linebackers. What Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah played. You're over the slot receiver. A lot of times, you're doing a lot of different things. Tell me the difference and maybe not just in Notre Dame's defense specifically, because I know you haven't been in those meeting rooms, but generally speaking, what's the difference between a Mike and a Will linebacker? Tell our listeners about that.
So this Mike M for middle, Will weak is W for weak. So traditionally speaking, and maybe this might be helpful. Like a Will is the running back and the Mike is the fullback. A Will is to offense what a running back would be, and then so like as a Mike, you're in the center of the defense, and oftentimes you're taking on blockers and you're spilling the ball to your Will. So he's the free player. He's oftentimes a little bit more athletic, a little bit more rangy, slips blocks. He's usually not the guy that wants to take on blockers. He's best utilized as kind of a pursuit, run and hit type player. And a Mike is more of the thumper, kind of in the middle. It just very generically speaking, got to be able to run with a tight end, but you're not asking him to leave the box. And then our Rover is kind of a hybrid type, right? He's like a safety guy, just more comfortable. And it is interesting. So, like, as you're having been a Mike for so many years, of the times that I was asked that maybe in a versus an empty formation to displace or to leave the box, you feel like you're naked because you're outside of that your comfort zone, which is just between the tackle to tackle. So that's pretty much it. And then in terms of like your reads, and then you could throw in a Sam. So a Sam traditionally plays over a tight end. His reads are much simpler. So he's looking at the tight end for whatever type of block, down block, base block. As a Mike, you get a little bit more real estate because I'm 5 yards off the ball, but your read is much more complex because you're soaking in more things, right? But you have more real estate and more time to kind of negotiate that. Me being a little bit critical of him playing high is truly coming from a place of caring as somebody that's had a labrum surgery and missed a year of college football because of it. and he's not afraid of time. He's a super physical player, and when he figures that out, but you and I have talked about this multiple times where in our post game shows where me specifically, you're looking for dogs and guys that love football and play with a little bit of fire. And we've got like Bo Bauer's a little bit of that, and Marist is a little bit of that. Just players that come to mind immediately. Uh, Tuihalamaka's got that same type of sort of grit and that kind of internal fire, which I like to see. And that kind of lends itself to that intimidation factor I touched on earlier.
That's linebacker analysis from Mike Goolsby. You can't get that anywhere else. That's Captain Mike, former Notre Dame linebacker. And that's us talking about new Notre Dame commitment, Niuafe Jr. Tuihalamaka.